Hi, I'm Jimmy Young.
And I'm Dan Lothian. Whatever it might be, we are here to talk about it.
It's about who you are, how you act, and more importantly, how you treat others.
If I wouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it. I'm a reporter, so I've got to verify it.
This is really the first time I'm embarrassed to be an American. I'm very comfortable with my masculinity. And
that's why you wear a sort of pink shirt. They're the emojis of real life. This is just out of control right now.
I don't think so.
This is not about politics.
How does the president lower himself to the level of a child in a sandbox?
Right. It below that, actually. It's the dirt. Once you get all the sand out, it's the dirt down below that.
Everywhere you are now, you're on camera. People don't know how to act.
If I wouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it.
By the way, I'm never allowed back in the kayak.
This is just out of control right now, and it's red hot. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Friday Afternoon Live. I'm Dan Lothian.
And I'm Jimmy Young.
And this is a program, of course, about the media and topical news events of the week. What a week it has been.
Yes.
It seems that every week just builds on the next.
That's what happens when you do fresh content on a regular basis, right?
And people seem to be finding us. I mean, we're growing our audience. We're getting really good feedback from the folks out there. We welcome you. And we encourage you to invite other folks to come and join us on this show.
Share us, like us, take advantage of us, please.
In the meantime, Jimmy and I are becoming fast friends and tennis partners.
Yes, indeed.
And if you rank Jimmy as an A,
oh boy,
I would be ranked somewhere around a D+.
I disagree. I think you're a C with with a lot of rust, but you're gonna come back. We're gonna get that rust off you very quickly.
I was factoring that rust into my tennis game, but thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate that. Okay, let's get down to business. We divide our show into quarters, which means into 4 parts, with a halftime show, and we have a halftime break, if you will, and so that's where we give our plug and so forth. And by the way, we can plug now. If you're out there watching this show, listening to this show, you'd love to be a sponsor of this show, feel free to reach out to us at info@littleparkmedia.com or
Jimmy@AmericanBroadcastCoaches.com.
And of course, we're coming to you live from the Little Park Studios in Wellesley, Massachusetts. So our topics for today: what hiring managers are looking for in new journalists, how the reporters and their networks have been covering Hurricane Harvey, a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and why the Hallmark Channel has seen a huge spike in ratings. This one is, this surprised me. I didn't even know that this was happening. It wasn't on my radar. Now it is, and I think it's an interesting story.
Absolutely, as is the fourth quarter, Dan, because you have amazing stories about covering Katrina.
That's right.
And if anybody is watching what's going on in Houston and knows what's going on with Hurricane Harvey, you can imagine what the media people are actually going through in order to see how they have to cover it and what they have to put up with in a very, very challenging situation. You have some great anecdotes about that in the fourth quarter.
It's anytime you're covering a story like that, it's massive. Certainly, more importantly, for the people involved, it's a tragedy. But reporters go in there, people think we're kind of, in the 5-star hotel. They're also going through some tough conditions. Not asking for any kind of sympathy here because we choose to go in, but there are a lot of interesting things that happen behind the scenes, and I'll share that in the fourth quarter. But first, we welcome on the phone Joe Sullivan, sports editor at the Boston Globe. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Yeah, you guys reminded me. And I'm upset. I forgot the TiVo Christmas in September on the Hallmark Network.
Oh. Yeah, I mean it's amazing. I wish you could stick around and watch that.
I'm still laughing.
And we don't want to jump ahead to that segment, but this is a nation that there's a lot of negative stuff in the news every day, and when that happens, people are fleeing to softer, nicer, gentler content. And that is what that story's about. But we'll get to that later. We want to talk to you. First of all, a little bio here. You've been in your role as the sports editor at the Boston Globe since 2004. You started at the Globe in 1994 as the assistant sports editor. And before that, you were sports editor at the Asbury Park Press in New Jersey, also worked at 3 other New Jersey publications, and you're a graduate of St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia.
And is one of the premier authorities on college basketball in the country. I'll throw that in there too, Joe.
Is there anything you haven't done?
Thank you, Jimmy. And the answer, the question everyone asks me when Asbury Park comes up, of course, I have never met Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay. Well, I guess I don't have my Springsteen knowledge, for to have asked that question.
And I thought he called my show one night when I got a caller from the boss, and it turned out it was George Steinbrenner calling me, and I was a little disappointed, to be honest. But then, of course, I interviewed him, and it was very cool.
It was the other boss.
It was the other boss.
So we wanted to have you on for many different reasons, but the topic that everyone has been talking about, not only recently but in the last several years, is just the changing landscape of the news business and certainly the sports business as well. And I guess technology is playing a big role in all of this. When a young journalist, or I guess a middle-aged journalist, comes looking for a job in the sports department, are you looking for someone who is great journalistically and can write, or are you skewing now more towards someone who can do everything, who can shoot, who can edit, the sort of the multimedia package?
So this is, I'll start. I'm gonna answer your question, but I have to get on my soapbox first.
Okay.
What worries me about the industry that we have as news organizations is how great writing is not as appreciated as it once was because of this rush to print or publish so quickly.
Amen.
And I really worry about that. Is that ringing? You guys hearing that? I'm sorry. That's Bob Ryan. He's usually in a hurry, but hopefully he'll hang up quick.
I did not hear that.
And so that being said, one thing we fight here at the Globe is to try to preserve good writing whenever we can. That being said, the digital skills are just an absolute necessity for any young journalist. You must be able to, you have to have the skills, these basic sort of skills of being able to take video with your phone and do it well, to then transfer it somewhere where it can be published. You need to be social media wise on multiple platforms. People talk about Twitter, but there's other ones that, these are all necessary to drive people to your material. But beyond that, you need to have sort of a digital mindset, and you would think all young people would have it, but it's not necessarily the case. In that you need to realize that speed is very important. That as soon as you feel you're ready, and I use that phrase very forcefully, that you need to get something published as quickly as possible. But what we like to think at the Globe is we like to publish quickly. But then we can refresh, we can expand, we can make it better, and we continue to publish or republish stories as the day goes on in some cases.
It's funny, Joe, as a devoted reader of the Globe since I was old enough to read, which was a long time ago, let's just say.
Wasn't that just yesterday?
Oh, you were an early reader of that.
Yes, I was an early reader. Well, it's because my mother was a reading instructor, so I did have a little advantage on that. That being said, one thing I have noticed about Boston.com/Boston Globe journalist is that you guys do advance your stories now. I mean, sure, the print days of when a deadline is, when the press has to start printing actual paper, but the stories continue all day long. So when I know something breaks, I can go to Boston.com and I can see the first wave of reaction to whatever story from your staff. I'm guessing that's on purpose.
It absolutely is on purpose, and it is a requirement now that, for example, the Celtics just had their press conference with the Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving, so there is a story that has already been published about that press conference.
Great.
Now, that's not the complete story or the fully in-depth story that you want to read, but there are people, especially at this hour, 12:10, on a weekday, who will want to read that while they're eating lunch. We sometimes worry that we're heading for a business model that is based on people goofing off at work, but that may be what we're stuck with. But then there will be a fuller story later, and hopefully written very skillfully.
It's not
people will have on the web first, and then in tomorrow's print product that's the phrase we've kind of fallen back on now.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's goofing off. I think the term they use now is multitasking, Joe.
Very well said.
By the way, for those of you listening to this on the podcast without the video, we're speaking to Joe Sullivan, the editor, the sports editor at the Boston Globe. The question, Joe, that always comes up when we compare sports reporters to, or sports journalists in general, to news reporters is the issue of how close is too close to the people you're covering. And I know I've seen this happen before. Whenever there's a real crazy story going on in sports, usually it's the news guy who goes in and will throw that bomb in there. And some of the sports guys are a little upset because, you know, it might upset the star of the team or the coach and so forth. How do you strike a balance between needing to get access to the stars and the team officials and covering them in such a way that they're agreeable to talk to you?
Well, it can be a fine line. I think you're right. As far as guidance I would give to any of a beat writer when you're dealing with players on a team or coaches also is that, friendly is fine. You never want to be friends with someone that you're covering. And so that should be your guideline. At the Globe, when we do more in-depth pieces about certain players, it's often we go to other reporters because we have reporters who specialize in those things. So when we write about Tom Brady and his sort of debatable relationship with the Best Buddies charity, we have an expert on that, Bob Hohler, who can do that type of reporting very skillfully and write it wonderfully. He's the best person to do that type of story. And whereas our Patriots, the people who cover the Patriots for us, I mean, really, they have their daily duties all the time, and covering a major league team of any sport right now is practically a year-round job. There might be a week or two where you don't have anything, but I know I had to pull a guy off vacation last week when the Celtics made the Kyrie Irving trade.
Yeah, you said debatable about foundations, and I know exactly the article.
Is that what I said? Yeah.
Yes, you called it debatable, so I figured I'd jump right in there.
I was being diplomatic, Jimmy.
I don't know anything about politics, Joe, okay? Forget diplomacy, all right? Anyway, I wanted – the thing about that article that rubbed me not perhaps the wrong way, because I did think Bob did a great job with it, to be honest, but it's the fact that Brady is no different than any other huge celebrity who has a foundation. Foundations in their own, whether it's the Clinton Foundation or the, there's a couple of other foundations out there that we could mention too, that sometimes I don't want to say they bend the rules, but they're there so that the people with money can give back some of that money to the community or to whatever charity they so choose, okay? And then, sure, they're giving of their own personal time to that, but I just think the lines are set up so they have to be blurred a little bit, Joe, I guess, is what I'm saying. But do you not agree with that or agree with that?
Hey, Joe, just before you jump in.
What you say is true, but I don't think it's 100%. I think there are people who give of their own time freely and give over their own money out of their own pocket generously. And in this case, what you had is someone who was basically getting paid for their time. And, we've revealed this before about the Best Buddy Tom Brady relationship, and it wasn't included in this story, is that he because of what he does for him, he gets the use of a $100,000 car for an entire year. That's a job. That's not charitable work. And and then he takes the money that people were donating to Best Buddies. They thought that was charity, but instead it goes to these other places where Tom Brady is designated. Now, he's not putting it in his pocket. I'm not saying that. But it was very deceptive in my mind and quite honestly, cheap.
But I think they're
all his own pocket for these other charities.
Okay. But I also think that, and again, I don't want to sound like an apologist. I'm just trying to broaden the scope of the whole flavor of the article. That there is a problem with foundations in general. I think one of them is the United Way, I'm pretty sure 60% of the United Way dollar goes to administrative, not charities. And I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that, please.
You're absolutely right. And Holler did a story probably a decade ago about athletes' charities and the good ones and the bad ones. And there are many bad, as you said, that some are just set up to have relatives work for them and do very little work. As I recall, and this is because I'm a positive person, Jimmy, I remember the good ones that were mentioned at a Holler story back then. But in that story, there were Tom Brady and Pedro Martinez and Manny Ramirez are three people who were examples of bad charity work. But so I do remember the negative. But two of the ones that were positive were the Lance Armstrong charity.
Oh boy!
Right.
I knew there was another one out there. Right.
Totally corrupt as an athlete, but his charity, which everyone loved, was actually very good. And this one is heartwarming, and it's the oh no, I'm drawing a blank. Why am I drawing a blank, Jimmy, in the middle of a podcast when I should be so sharp?
That's okay.
But remember the player that was paralyzed playing hockey for BU?
It's Travis Roy, and he's a friend, actually, someone I've known since he was 7 years old.
Yeah, Travis is a wonderful guy, and his charity is very small, but does great work. Actual specific things. For example, if someone has a similar accident to him, they will pay for the ramps to be built at their houses, things like that.
Right.
So there are charities that do specific wonderful work and don't just put money in people's pockets. And I still think one thing that people put up as a defense of that is that in some ways you were doing this, Jimmy, is like, well, other people do it too. And that's not good enough for me.
Right.
I understand, but in its own right, the word charity is a good thing. I think we can all agree with that. And then, you did say there is bad charity work. And yet, if you talk to some of the athletes, they get pulled in so many different directions. A lot of times people want a piece of them to get investments in companies and what have you. And I still defend a lot of the athletes and some of the more rich people in the world, because I do think deep down they want to do something good, but they value time away from their family. So they do have to put a price tag on their charitable work.
Right. Well, Joe, I want to kind of shift just a little bit to the question that I always get asked is, how do you decide? Well, Jimmy asked me this last week is, what is news?
Great. Yeah, that's right. It's a great question.
And so the question for
sorry,
you.
How do I decide what?
No, he asked me, what is news, right? And how do you decide what to cover on the news side? So I'm asking you, as people sit back and try to figure out, how do you decide what story warrants showing up in the paper or online? What is the measurement that you use to decide what is sports news?
Well, I think our overriding factor is what the things that our readers would be interested in the most. That would be my formula for that. Within reason, we could put pornographic material in the Globe and probably increase our sales.
Yes,
we're not going to do that. And now with the web, we know with certainty what interests our readers the most. And for us, it is the four pro teams, and I'm going to exclude the Revolution as the fifth one. That's what the people who come to BostonGlobe.com. Those are the stories they're reading, and so that's where we have to concentrate our efforts.
Right. And
if you're talking about whether there's breaking news and how important it is, that's sort of an innate sense that you have, an experience in the business.
Right.
And we often have discussions in here about certain things and what it's worth, where it should be played, and how big the headline should be. We have those discussions on a case-by-case basis.
And how have you been able to compete with the blogs out there, the Bleacher Reports of the world, Barstool? I mean, there's so many areas now where young people specifically are going and getting their sports content. How are you able to compete with those startups?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's difficult. There's no question. Bleacher Report is mostly aggregates other people's material, so I'll resist that's not really journalism. But they do have an arm that does produce quality journalism also, and they do good work. So I guess they've created a real convenient ways to find stories. What our goal should be, if they're using something from the Globe, we want people to have to stop and pay for it when they get to it. That should be our goal. When you're talking about something like Barstool, which is incredibly successful, I don't consider that journalism. I consider that a whole different realm of entertainment that we would not try to compete with.
Do you worry that boy talk, obnoxious subjects that Barstool has really cornered the market on, and I might say has bled into sports radio talk as well? Do you worry about that becoming what people might actually consider to be journalism?
Yes, I do, and I think there might be people who do consider that journalism, and it's not. It's entertainment, and the people are allowed to enjoy what they want to enjoy. I'm not going to sit up on a mountain and tell people don't read that if they find it entertaining. But technically, you're right, Jimmy. It's not journalism. I consider it entertainment. And
you made the analogy, the funny analogy to pornography, because you were talking about readers' interests, and this is what concerns me: is that the masses, the public, they're not looking for good stories anymore.
They're looking for news pornography.
They're looking for news pornography. They're looking for things they can talk about. Hey, did you hear about? Hey, so-and-so said this. That's what really, again, as an older person, that's what concerns us.
That can be true for a certain segment. But our numbers on the web show that when we have quality material, let's say from our Spotlight team,
those are some of the most well-read things that we publish online. Good. I feel better about humanity.
Still people that want that type of journalism.
Right.
And I feel better about humanity.
That's how we have to sell ourselves.
Right. I get you. That's right.
And remain relevant. I think that's the key, right? You always have to stay fresh and do the stories that people are talking about. And
I think from a sports point of view, I'd like to think that we have a staff that is that writes very well and is very smart, knowledgeable, that people would want to come and pay for the material.
Right.
That's what our philosophy is.
Wow. Joe Sullivan.
I like to think that if you want to read about the Patriots, there's no one better to read than Ben Bowen.
Right.
Okay.
The late Will McDonough, you could say that too, because as you know, I am old school.
Well, yeah, boy, we would sell the heck out of him if he was still here.
Right? Joe Sullivan, the sports editor at the Boston Globe, thank you so much for joining us. It was great having you on the show.
Well, thanks very much. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
All right.
Wow.
So that was Joe Sullivan. He's just wonderful.
Man,
it doesn't get enough
stuff.
credit, I might add. Now, I want to just explain. He's the assistant editor of the Boston Globe for sports.
Okay. There we go.
So that's why the graphic is there.
Right.
That's a little bit more prestigious. I'm sure it has to do with money. What a shock.
Right. Okay.
So, again, assistant editor of the Boston Globe in charge of sports.
Right. Okay. There we go.
There you go.
Wow. We don't have a bell here to ring going
where's our bell?
The second quarter.
Wait. You took it out of the room last week.
No, I put it on your desk. You have the bell.
It's on my desk?
Yes, you should have brought the bell.
Quick, Scott, run to the desk. Find the bell.
As we
It's
wait
in
for
plain
the
sight.
arrival.
It's
It
in
looks
plain
like
sight.
a miniature cowbell.
Yeah, very miniature. But
I know.
It's gotta be
because
there.
we can't move on to the second quarter without having the cowbell, right?
That's right. And I'm sure.
It arrives. I can hear it. It is.
Awesome.
It is here, ladies and gentlemen.
Scott Mullally, you get a big assist on that. Thank you very
Wow.
much.
So we move on to our second quarter, covering Hurricane Harvey and what. Boy, it has been a real tragedy just watching the pictures come in. I actually stopped watching it all because it just became a little overwhelming. I mean, did you feel the same way?
Yeah, that's why I went to the Hallmark Channel.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, but it's exhausting emotionally. It is really, and I felt the same way about Katrina.
Right.
And we were, as you know, what year was Katrina?
Oh my goodness. What?
04?
2005?
05?
2005.
So we're talking quick math, 12
12
years ago.
Yeah.
Look at how technology has changed in that 12-year period and how the coverage is now compared to, back then it really was. You could only watch the network news channels to see coverage. Now it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And
any person out there with a phone is a network.
Right.
And so you get a lot more.
I think a reporter is a better is a reporter, not
as
a
reporter.
reporter.
Yeah, but it's visceral images that come in instantly now because everyone has the capacity, the capability to send that in. But the question that comes up in this issue is, you know, a reporter is out there, you're trying to capture what's going on to pass it on to the public, but at the same time, when should you report and when should you help? And certainly when you're out there, you are a reporter first, right?
Right.
But a lot of times you get some blowback because you're out there reporting, and people need to be rescued. They're in a difficult, horrible situation, and you're running around in your boat with cameras and lights and microphones trying to get a soundbite. I mean, boy, how do you? You know, the question then comes up, what are you guys doing here?
Right. And you also, it's like you have to self-edit. You have to self-edit. What is the best story here? And you've talked about this, you know, thinking a little bit deeper rather than just going out and getting that quick emotional sound.
Right. But in the moment, though, you're out there with the camera, with the microphone in front of people who are trying to just save themselves in the moment or take something out of their homes and flee, and you're there. And some people think, you know, reporters are crossing the line, that they're coming into that space where a tragedy is occurring, where you shouldn't be just standing there pointing the camera and exploiting the emotions of the victims or the people stuck in a horrible situation, that you should either be doing something or getting out of there.
Right. And we have a great example of that, if you will, from your old friends at CNN this past week. Now, I know you and I have not talked. It should be ready to go. It's ready to go. Should we take a look at it?
Yeah, well, I'll set it up.
Set it up a bit, and just keep in mind that I have edited out the explicit language.
Right. And so what this is reporter Rosa Flores is at a shelter in Houston, and it's clear that she's had a conversation with this mother of 2 young children who walks into the shelter because she mentions her first name. So there's been some communication there. She's interviewing her, clearly on live television with lights and microphone, and it starts out as an ordinary, you know, description of here's what happened to us, and then it goes south. Take a listen.
People there, and I see you're standing with some folks there right now, including a little girl who I guess has to deal with all of this as well. What can you tell us?
Let me introduce you to Danielle here. Danielle, you just arrived. Share with us how you were rescued.
Some guys had called our phone and asked us where we were. We was waiting for the police for like 36 hours and they never came. And we was waiting at the home. We did the white flags and everything and nobody came. But then somebody had called the phone after we decided to leave the house, and we had walked to the gas station with the kids, and then they had called and came and picked us up. But we had been there like 5 days with no food and no lights, and nobody came. Like nobody came.
Now, you're with your children. We've heard of stories of mothers trying to save their children from the rushing waters. Can you tell us how that was?
We walked through 4 feet of water to go get them food on the first day. Yeah, that's a lot of shit. But y'all sitting here, y'all trying to interview people during their worst times. Like, that's not the smartest thing to do. Like, people are really breaking down, and y'all sitting here with cameras and microphones trying to ask us what the is wrong with us.
So I'm so
and
sorry.
You really trying to understand it with the microphone still in my face, with me shivering cold, with my kids wet, and you still putting the microphone in my face.
Sorry. Rosa Flores, it sounds like you've got a very upset family there. We're going to take a break from that, and we'll get back to you later on. Rosa Flores in Houston.
Not an easy situation for the reporter.
Not at all.
Not an easy situation for the anchor on the desk. So, Dan, I'm going to turn it to the former NBC CNN news correspondent. How would you have handled that? Is that right, or is there a wrong here?
Look, I don't think there's clearly an expectation when you have a camera, when you have lights, you have a microphone, and you willingly walk up to a microphone and you're asked a series of questions. First of all, I don't think her follow-up question was offensive at all.
It was, in fact, to me, it was indirect.
It was
which
an
allowed
indirect.
the person being interviewed, okay, I got to say something here.
Right.
And that went directly to emotions.
Right. Now, first of all, I want to have this caveat. Here is clearly a woman who's probably still in shock, extreme shock. She's gone through probably one of the most difficult moments of her life. And maybe she wasn't even thinking clearly maybe didn't even see the microphone and the lights. I mean, she's in a fog, perhaps, right? So I can understand that from her side. At the same time, you know, as a reporter, you're still trying to get at the story, and that's what she was doing. What I would have done, the only thing differently that I would have done, because I've been in situations where you're having to put a microphone in right in front of someone, and oftentimes they tell you to get out of here. It isn't always live, so the public doesn't see it. But I think that, you know, when she started the first time she talks about, and reporters are here with the microphone, it didn't sound like she was going to start going after that reporter. It sounded like she was speaking broadly about, you're out there, you're being rescued, and people are putting microphones in there. So I probably would not have pulled that back with that first, you know, mention of the microphone. By the second time, it was clear what was going on. And at that point, I would have probably said, which I've done before, you know, I'm really sorry for your pain, sorry for what you're going through, you know, turn back to the anchor and say, you know, this is another example of how difficult it is out here, the kinds of things that the folks who are dealing with this are facing, and certainly a tragedy. And, you know, back to you, Joe Smith,
right,
whatever it might be. That's what I would have done, right? But I think that, you know, people have been very critical. I know you were in the grocery store. Didn't you run into someone who was talking?
I was at Marshall's at the checkout
yeah,
counter, and I started talking to a woman there, and she was like, "Hey, did you see this video?" Because she knew that I was in the media at some point in my life, and
like right now.
Yeah, like now. And it's because I said, you know, we'll be talking about this on our show. Oh, you do a show, and then she said, anyway. So again, she was like. She was smiling. It was like, oh, she berated this reporter. And I said, well, you know, I heard the incident. I'm not quite sure berating is what happened. It was just a wrong place at the wrong time, saying the wrong things.
Right.
And that's all based on raw emotion.
And as you know, reporters have had the big target on their backs. Everything that the news
it's the media's
does,
fault.
It's a feeding frenzy now. So this sort of plays into a lot of that we're there to exploit. And it's not to say, I'm not here to speak for every reporter and every organization out there. There are some reporters who clearly are thinking more about, I really don't care about the people I'm covering. I'm just here to, get the great story. But you have to go into something like this with a certain level of empathy. Mm-hmm. And reporters are trying, that's what they get paid to do, is you go in, you cover it. And what's kind of interesting is that people complain about this, but the reason they complain is they saw it. So they were watching it. It's the same thing like the tabloids. And in our pre-show meeting, we were talking about how everyone will say, well, I don't read the tabloids. They're doing junk and all that. Somebody's reading them because they make a lot of money.
Right.
And so people complain about reporters going into places and exploiting people, but they're the same people who are at home watching this stuff.
Is it exploitation? You're just doing your job.
I know, but for the general public out
Correct.
there, they're like throwing bombs at reporters and saying,
because we're easy target. Because
easy
targets.
Easy target. Now, I will say, for those who have been critical of reporters covering and not helping and rescuing. Again, CNN, and we're not referring to CNN just because I used to work there, but just because they're good examples about what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. Drew Griffin, who's a former colleague of mine, I know him well, an investigative reporter at CNN, was out in Beaumont, Texas. They were covering the flooding, and at one point they see an elderly man driving his truck into what he thinks is a flooded street. It turns out to be some kind of a culvert. It was much deeper than he expected, and his truck started floating away. Now, for those who beat up on reporters, they would have said, you probably sat there and watched the guy float down the river, and didn't do anything. But that's not what they did.
Right.
They grabbed some rope. They threw the rope out. They were able to rescue him. And we were looking at this, when this happened, and the guy said, look, thank you. These guys saved my life. Yeah. So there's a case of reporters out there covering the story, but still jumping into action, helping to rescue someone in the process. So,
and good for him, and showing humanity. That's
right.
And especially now with this outpour. This is, I believe, I saw this report this morning on the Today Show that this will be the worst natural disaster in the history of this country.
Yeah, it's and there will, as always, when you have these kinds of things happen, there will be a lot of discussions about what could have been done ahead of time. Houston has not been this invisible place with no questions surrounding it about flooding. For decades, there have been a lot of questions about what can be done to ensure that, or perhaps minimize or mitigate something like this from taking place. And so, whenever something like this happens, there are going to be a lot of tough questions asked. Now is not necessarily the time to be going after some of those, what should we have done, because they're still in that mode of search and cleanup and all that. And but those are certainly tough questions that will be asked, and I'm sure the media will be covering that along the way.
And amazingly enough, the stories of the people who fled Katrina to Houston are now getting hit again.
I know. What a tragedy, right?
I just say to myself, I've said this to the woman check. I said, why do people live there?
I know.
What is it? Come on, people, get out of there.
Yeah, but Jimmy, people would say, why do you live here in New England when it snows every year and you have to go out and shovel snow? It's where your relatives are, or other people who you love, or your friends, or a job. It's not as easy to say, I'm going to get up and get out of here.
I understand.
And so you have to take that into consideration as to why people end up in those places more than once. Right. Okay, that's the end of second quarter. This is the halftime show, and this is where we get a chance to pretty much tell you whatever we want. This show is brought to you by WorkZest. We're creating engaging content for the workplace. Also, Jimmy, a time for tease. Tease us to what's coming up next week.
Well, since I will not be here next week.
Oh, no. Why not, Jimmy?
I'm going to be on vacation. Everybody in the world has already taken their summer vacation, and I have not.
You know why? Because now you get the best rates. September, it's like off peak season. You get the best rates.
That's not why I went on vacation, just for the record. I'm turning 60 years old on Sunday. And
Happy birthday.
It's one of those midlife crisis things.
If you're watching this live or you're watching it on the rewind.
Right. On demand.
On demand, sorry. You can please wish Jimmy a happy birthday. Jimmy likes birthday wishes. He does.
That's why I celebrate for pretty much a month every time.
It's the birthday month.
And I was born on the 3rd of September, which was the first day of school. And it's one of those tough birthdays because you get to school and nobody cares if it's your birthday. Sorry, it's the first day of school. We're not ready to celebrate any birthdays in class.
That's true.
Obviously a very big tragedy in my life. Through my life, I've had to deal with it.
I'm sorry.
But
anyway,
I joke about that. But I did prepare something. In a week, Dan will be introducing an interview that I did with one of my dear friends in media. He works here in Boston at WCVB TV, Channel 5. His name is Bob Halloran. He has been at Channel 5 for 14 years, never had a sick day in his career until about a year ago, August, at the first day of Patriots camp. Bob was on assignment. Now, he had headaches for about 4 or 5 days and had scheduled an appointment with his doctor on that Monday and was doing his job, and then on his way to the appointment, he suffered a very, very scary brain aneurysm. And here's Bob talking about that, and as an excerpt of next week's podcast, vodcast, and interview.
My head is pounding, and I did the Vosot for the 4 and the package for the 5 and something for sports, and so we got it all done. I left at like 2:30, and so now I'm going to Milton Hospital, and I get off the road. At one point, I stopped for something at Dunkin' Donuts just because I didn't know when I'd be able to eat again. And as I pulled out, I decided it was time to park the car because something definitely wasn't right. And while I was parking the car, I was passing out and crashing into some shrubs and trees. No damage to the car, no damage to me or anything. But by the time just the brain aneurysm.
Just the brain aneurysm,
yeah. But when I woke up, there were Good Samaritans there giving me ice cold water. I don't know where they came from, but it was terrific. It felt great. The EMTs were already there. So I don't know how long I was out or anything. They took me to Milton Hospital, and the emergency doctor there was the first to start to suspect that it might be a brain aneurysm. I mean, it's not something that you see every day. Right. He certainly could have thought that I was dehydrated, that I had sunstroke, that I was hungover, that I just had a migraine.
He hadn't talked to you at that point? He didn't?
He did. I was awake at different times.
Yep.
I've seen him since then, and he said, you seemed really agitated that day. I go, I was in pain and stuff. So
obviously, Bob also suffered a very emotional reaction to what was his body was going through. It's an incredible story. Bob's a dear friend. So
that's
tune in next week.
Yeah, that's a tease for
That's
next
right.
week to hear the whole story. It's a powerful story.
And he's 99.5% back to 100%.
Yeah.
And he, even when I talk to him, not necessarily in this interview, but talk about, what do you notice anything? He says he still has some lapses. He says what's difficult is, okay, what's normal for a 50-plus-year-old?
Right.
And
which we're all facing.
Right. And, I mean, poor Joe Sullivan, lost his train of thought, too.
Right.
I mean, it was like, wait, oh,
Everyone
Travis
does.
Roy, I can help with that.
Yeah.
And what isn't. And
Right.
I think that's what Bob is facing now. But I'll tell you, he's clever. He's got an incredible sense of humor. He's a great writer, and he has a book coming out in the fall about the championship era of Boston sports over the last 15 years, and I can't wait for that. So,
Of course, that is next week on Friday Afternoon Live while Jimmy is off on vacation, and I will be here toiling. By the way, a reminder again, if you'd like to, we have a couple of sponsors that we're about ready to lock up.
Yeah.
But we're still looking for additional sponsorships. If you'd like to showcase a product or your company or whatever it may be, please get in touch with us. We'd love to have you as a partner on Friday Afternoon Live. You can reach out to us at info@littleparkmedia.com or
Jimmy at AmericanBroadcastCoaches.com. And not only do you get little plugs and appearances on our show, but you get us too. Okay?
wow.
I mean, when you
Yeah.
get right down to it, we'll make an appearance for
show
you
up-
guys.
We show
wherever-
up on a Friday and we dance.
That's
right.
right. Whatever
we
you
have
need
this
us to
great
do.
dance routine.
Whatever you need us to do. All
Okay,
right.
we're off to the third quarter. Third quarter, and there's the cowbell. And this is a story that we teased a little bit at the top. Actually, more than teased. We delved into it just a little bit, but I didn't know what was going on here with the Hallmark Channel. First of all, I must admit, it skews women. It has always skewed towards women. Years ago, my wife used to watch it all the time because there was some show, I think it was called Snapped, women who go after the men who abuse them and that kind of thing. But anyway,
That's not a feel-good
no,
one.
no, it is not. It's not
That's what
and I hope I got my channels right. The Snap was on Hallmark, but anyway, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was another one.
It doesn't sound like a
No,
Hallmark
maybe it
show.
was. But anyway, Hallmark always has these feel-good stories and shows, and something unusual is happening, Jimmy.
Yeah, the ratings are going up because people are tuning away from the news and they want an escape from reality. So they're tuning into the Hallmark Channel because that programming always ends with a positive story.
Right.
And I like the way that spins. And just for instance, the Hallmark, my honey always says, I cry at Hallmark commercials.
Oh.
I'm very sensitive.
That's you? You're saying you cry?
I do. I'm very sensitive.
Wait.
I'm very
So you're
sensitive.
saying you're sitting there at home.
Yes.
A Hallmark commercial comes on
Yes.
around the holidays.
Yes.
And you sit
if it's
there
done
and,
right.
and you cry.
If it has a lot to do with the mother, father, child thing than anything, because
And-
I've
and
had
the-
such a
and the-
great upbringing, so when it
And the
brings back
music,
memories.
they have the right tone with the music, and you start
Absolutely.
bawling
and
your head off.
And I choke up. I can't talk about. You'll hear me choke up during
Right, right.
these shows. I
Wow.
just do. I'm a very emotional guy. What
Your
can I tell
Hallmark
you?
moment. Wow.
I am a
I did not
Hallmark
know
is my
that.
middle name. I think when you get right down to it.
Well, I was actually having a conversation with someone who just randomly mentioned, the way Hallmark's ratings are going up. I go, wait, what? Really? So then I Googled it, and there was this interesting article from the Washington Post, and it's the headline is, "The Feel-Good Hallmark Channel is booming in the age of Trump." And we're not going to go down the Trump road here on this show, but here's a quote from it. It says, it's feel-good TV. There's no sex or gore. Hallmark movies and series like When Calls the Heart and Chesapeake Shores have happy endings. The main characters do the right thing. The problems get worked out. The guy and girl, whatever their age or grumpiness level at the start, always end up together. This kind of TV has always drawn in older women, but Hallmark's appeal isn't limited to them anymore.
Yeah, it's a great story, and it's funny. We don't mention the president's name because we don't want to get pulled into the political discussion that every other show does.
Right.
And again, getting an escape from reality. It goes counter a little bit to the news discussion we had, not only with you, but with Joe, about what our readers want.
Right.
And if it bleeds, it leads has been the cliche in the news business for many years.
And look, and I think that doesn't go counter to it because people still want to watch. They want to watch the stuff they don't like, but then they want to escape to something, right? They just like, when you're getting ready for sleep, at night, some people like to, put on candles or light candles or mood lighting.
White noise. I do it
whatever
all the time.
you use to just kind of wind down for your day. Well, imagine that being this, right? So you get bombarded with so many negative stories throughout the day. Here's a way to sort of relax your mind. And to that end, the article goes on to say, quote, "The environment is undeniably contentious. We are at a place that you can go and feel good." This is the chief executive of Crown Media, which owns Hallmark. They go on in this article to say that when you turn on the news and you see people who can't get along, even in the same party, you can turn on Hallmark and everyone ends the show smiling.
And the CEO, is it Jeff Abbott? Maybe?
Yes, it is.
Bill Abbott.
Bill Abbott. Yep.
Sorry, Jeff and Bill.
Yeah, it's his brother.
That's right, of course. Quote here, "We intentionally branded ourselves as the happy place," Bill Abbott says.
Right.
Hallmark's tagline is, quote, "the heart of TV,"
Right.
which is nice. I mean, it's working. They're actually launching a third cable channel, which this article makes a point. In this era of getting away from traditional cable television, here's Hallmark kind of taking advantage of the fact that they're developing feel-good programming,
Right,
and they
right.
want to take advantage of it because why not? They'll make more money.
Well, they are making more
Right.
money because now,
Advertisers.
right? So they've always had a staple of advertisers that flock towards the skew that they have, which is women. But now apparently there are some new advertisers in products that appeal to men as well coming on board, and of course, more advertisers means more dollars. So this rating bump. From the need of society to get something positive, to find a feel-good place to rest their remote controls.
Right. And did you
Hallmark.
happen to look at the comments? The first comment, for instance.
I did not look at the
So
first
the first comment is reacting to a headline of this article.
Right.
Okay. And we could talk about headline writing. That
Right.
would have been a great thing for Joe.
Yes.
Right. But again, he says, "Oh, you're blaming it on Trump." I'm assuming that this guy Muliyam, I don't know, is a male. Blame it on Trump? Are you kidding? Okay, and then of course, who does he take a shot at? The liberal media.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to go on to
we
beyond that.
don't want to go down that
I
road.
will say
but
one thing. Please, people want news, not biased opinions. Please stop the hatred.
Look, I think that this
Okay.
is great. This is one of those great news stories, and strip the politics out of it, because both Republicans and Democrats are at each other in a way that we haven't seen in recent history. And I think it is sad for sort of our entire political system. What is good, though, is that people at the end of the day want positivity. And if it's not the only thing they want, but certainly as part of their diet, they don't want it all to be, the crime drama at night, or whatever it may be, the talk shows where people are screaming at each other. They want solutions. They want the people hugging and making up. They want the music that will, and the shows that, like Jimmy, will make them tear up.
I'm sorry. It's just the way I feel. I'm a sap. I'm a sap.
Now I know what to do in the office. If you come in screaming someday, I'm just going to turn on the Hallmark channel.
That'll do it.
Let's get to Jimmy with the Hallmark channel.
No,
Okay.
all you have to do is start talking about your kids, and that
there we
usually
go.
will do it.
Oh,
All right.
Okay, that was a great third quarter. We're on to the final quarter of our show. This is Friday Afternoon Live. I'm Dan Lothian.
And I'm Jimmy Young. Hey, that's right. That's who I am. Still.
Forgot who he is.
Senior moment now that I'm turning 60. Right?
Yeah, he's going on vacation, so he's already tuning out before the show is over. But this is a chance for those of you who are just tuning into our show. You haven't been here. What we do, again, we divide our show into 4 quarters. We have a halftime show, and where we do shameless plugs, but also in the fourth quarter, we get to talk about something in the business that ties directly to us, a personal take. Yeah. And for you, Jimmy, we're going down memory lane to how you got into business.
Well, it's funny. Now, I'm going to call what they call an audible, and it's going to feed
you're
into...
gonna,
I'm
here he
audibling
goes.
here.
He's blowing
I'm
off
going to talk
what we
to you.
planned.
Yes, because of what Joe Sullivan reminded me of.
Yeah. There you go. No, you just want to take control of the show. That's
No,
what you want.
I will not.
Like, we take turns being in the captain's seat, which is where I am today, with the control panel in front of me, and you're the second fiddle on this day.
Yeah.
But no, you want to be the second fiddle and take mine by calling an audible.
Well, actually, I know you're
on.
going to talk about your reporting of Katrina,
Right.
so I know how
You wanna-
powerful that is.
Oh, so you want to match it? Is what you're
I
saying?
definitely can match it.
Okay, go ahead, Jimmy.
And
Go
and
ahead.
it goes
Show
to
me
the
up.
it
Show me
go-
up.
Well, no, it goes to the we've been it's self-effacing here.
Okay,
I'm going to beat
okay.
up myself again
Okay, go ahead.
because we talk about how emotional I am.
Okay.
I was there when Travis Roy broke his neck at BU.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, and had to
Yeah.
do a live shot. Now,
Explain that again to folks who are not from this area and may not remember this story.
Travis Roy is a former Boston University college hockey player who played an entire 11 seconds in his college varsity career before he got crashed into the boards, broke his neck, and has been in a wheelchair ever since, and has devoted his life to building attention for spinal cord injuries and has given back from that foundation. In fact, Joe was talking about how a positive example of a foundation doing great work, getting vans for people, getting building ramps for the wheelchair bound people. And Travis is a great kid, but this, again, here's the story. I was on assignment in Rentham, Mass, covering a football. It was a football angle. Mosi Tatupu, the late Mosi Tatupu, a running back for the New England Patriots, was the head coach of the King Philip High School football team, and we were going to do a story about that, about a former professional football player now coaching in high schools. And I get called off that story, and I said, "Well, what's going on?" And they said, college hockey player at BU, I think got paralyzed or something. You got to get up there right now. Now, granted, I'm in Rentham, Mass to Brighton, Mass, or Alston, Mass, where BU is. It's a 45-minute drive.
Right.
And I said, can you give me a hint on, do we know who it is? And, some kid from Maine. And I went, can you give me a name? And he said, I think his last name is Roy. And I said, is it Travis Roy? And he said, oh my God, yes it is. I go, holy blank, beep, I know this family. His father, Lee, was involved with the Maine Mariners in Portland, Maine when I was covering the Maine market and from 1981 to 1992.
Right.
So I knew who this kid was. And it was like it shook me up. It still does. Since that time, I had to do a live shot. I barely got through it. Again, I'm still getting,
You're
it's
emotional.
tough.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
Wow.
Travis has since come on the shows that I've hosted at New England Cable News, one of them that won the Emmy, the sports talk show for kids. And I remember having to pick him up from the studio floor onto the riser. Because think about it, you're in a wheelchair, it's heavy. And I just remember we had to do that because risers in a TV studio, you don't have ramps.
Right, exactly. Right.
You don't have ramps. And anyway,
Wow.
great kid, still around. I definitely am going to be reaching out to Travis now that we've told
we
this
have to get
story,
him
and
on
I
the
got all
show.
emotional again.
Yes, you did, Jimmy. Wow.
So tell me about Katrina and how you reported on that,
Yeah, I'm gonna
because
try
it
not
was
to
an
get emotional.
incredible experience.
It really was, and as I was watching what reporters were doing and just the devastation in Houston, I had been covering a lot of the storms. I was on storm patrol, essentially, had been in New Orleans for Tropical Storm Cindy. And we were closing on our house at the time. In fact, my photographer I was working with also was closing on his house. So we had to leave the area, even though we knew Katrina was coming, and come back to our home. So
from New Orleans to Massachusetts.
Exactly. We did the closing on our homes. And then the day that we were closing is when it hit the day before, and then we found out that the levees were breached and breaking and so forth, and then things started to fall apart. And so we immediately, after we wrapped up, headed right back. We could not go in, obviously. We went to Houston.
Amazing.
And then we drove from Houston. It was my producer, myself, and the photographer. I remember... Actually, we were going in, and I remember my photographer saying, Dan, we're stopping at Walmart to buy some items because we were told bring stuff in. And while we were in the store, there was this box with a tent, and he said, we ought to grab this tent. And I said, well, we don't need a tent. CNN always provides housing. They'll figure something out. He goes, why don't we just buy the tent? And so it was one of these multi-bedroom tents. So I said, why not? So I bought the thing. It's a good thing that I did, because once we got there, there was no place to stay. And CNN was set up on the loading dock where the Hertz rental car agency parked their cars at the airport. It was kind of in the, back in the part where the public normally doesn't see it. And that's where we set up. And there were people sleeping on the loading dock. They eventually brought in some cots because there were rats on the loading dock, and some rats were running over people. They didn't want that, so they put some cots in. And we ended up setting up our tent right there. There was a little grassy area by the fence as you enter into the loading dock area. That's where we stayed for almost a week. We lived in this tent. So you might ask, how did we shower?
That was my next question, actually, because I know the answer.
Right. And so, for those of you who don't know, typically when you go in to cover a story, any kind of story, there's a hotel somewhere, some kind of facility that you can go back to and sort of get cleaned up and that kind of thing. Of course, there was nothing anywhere around there. And so we ended up, someone found one pipe that was still working. They attached a hose with a sprayer on it. They got some pieces of a fence and were able to create some walls. And then they got some tarp to make a door. And it was 60 some members of the CNN crew at the time at that location at the loading dock, and we would all line up at this tarp door, and we would go in, and you had just a few seconds to go in there, shower off with cold water, and then go back and get ready and head out and start covering the story. So those are things that we don't tell those stories to make people feel sorry for us. Oh wow, that's amazing. But I think it's more of people don't understand sometimes the conditions that reporters put themselves in order to bring the news to them, and that was one of those. It was not comfortable. We did not eat a real meal for a week because at the time CNN had not yet gotten food in. So there were some cans that were finally brought in of canned beans and that kind of thing. So for a week, I pretty much lived on whatever I brought in from Walmart, which were breakfast bars and some Gatorades and that kind of thing. I think what made it doubly difficult for us is that it was such an emotional story. So we were going out, and all day long we were either seeing bodies or meeting with people who were weeping, or going down streets in boats and ducking so your head didn't hit a stoplight. We were helping to rescue some people along the way as well. And then at night you go back and you sleep in your tent with no food. And so it was difficult. I mean, at some point you have to get out and breathe a little bit, and then you go back. I ended up covering that story for about 6 weeks.
That's incredible.
But it was, when people ask me what story stands out, and I've had a long career from local TV all the way up to national, that story is right up there in terms of the most powerful, emotional stories that I've ever covered. And that's what I present in the fourth quarter today.
That's awesome. And I'm just going to say, for those of you that are considering a career in broadcast journalism or multimedia journalism, sure, there's some glamour parts to it. You get to meet some celebrities. You get to do things and you have access to places that you may not as a normal person. But you opt in to your career. You marry your career. And this is something that you knew when you got into the career and got into the national spotlight, that you would have to go into harm's way as a first responder or a first reporter.
And what people always say, it's so odd because whenever tragedy is happening, everyone's running away from it and reporters are running to it.
Right.
And sometimes it can have some very difficult negative results.
And we saw an example again, and it's just the nature of the beast, and that's what media is here for. Not only to bring stuff to you, but to be a target of your frustration.
Exactly, and that's fine. That's what we signed up for, that's all good. Well, thank you very much for watching this show, either now live or later on demand, or listening to this show, which we're now on
iTunes and SoundCloud.
Wow, we're growing.
As Friday Afternoon Live.
And we're excited about the growth of this show. It is beyond our wildest dreams. We've been doing no marketing whatsoever, just kind of putting it out there, putting together a show that we feel will provide some information to our audience, and people seem to be liking it.
Yeah, it spins off the normal week-long conversations we have during the week, and then we think, this would be good for the show, let's save it.
That's right.
And I think that's how it's evolved nicely.
Well, again, thanks for watching and listening to Friday Afternoon Live. Our executive producer is Jonathan Sloan. Our technical director is Stephen Helmuth to my left, and in the other room, associate producer Scott Mullally. We hope that you'll share this show with your community on social media and come back again next week on Friday Afternoon Live.